On October 29, 2018, Lion Air Flight 610 took off from Jakarta, Indonesia. 12 minutes later, all 189 people on board were dead. The aircraft was a Boeing 737 MAX, brand new, delivered only 2 months earlier. 5 months after that, Ethiopian Airlines Flight 302 crashed in near-identical circumstances. 157 more people died. The same aircraft, the same system, the same failure. 2 crashes, 346 deaths. One piece of software that pilots didn't know existed, and a company that had knowingly left them out of the loop. To understand what happened, you need to understand the competitive pressure Boeing was under. In 2010, Airbus announced the A320neo, a new fuel-efficient version of its best-selling narrow-body aircraft. The Neo used new, more efficient engines that were significantly larger than the previous generation. Airlines loved it. Orders flooded in. Boeing had not planned to update its competing aircraft, the 737, so soon. But when American Airlines, one of its biggest customers, began seriously considering switching to Airbus, Boeing had no choice. In 2011, Boeing announced its own updated aircraft, the 737 MAX. The problem was the engines. The new, larger engines Boeing had selected were more efficient, but they were too large to fit under the 737's low-slung wings in the same position as before. Boeing had to move them forward and upward, which changed the aircraft's aerodynamics. Under certain conditions, the new engine placement caused the nose of the aircraft to pitch upward. Left uncorrected, this could lead to a stall. Boeing's solution was a software system called MCAS, the Maneuvering Characteristics Augmentation System. If MCAS detected that the nose was pitching up too steeply, it would automatically push it back down. The problem was what it relied on to detect that. MCAS relied on a single sensor called the angle of attack sensor. It was mounted on the exterior of the aircraft and measured how steeply the nose was pointed relative to the airflow. There are 2 such sensors on a 737 MAX, one on each side of the fuselage. MCAS used only one. If that single sensor malfunctioned, if it gave a false reading, MCAS would respond as if the aircraft were pitching up dangerously. It would push the nose down, and it would keep pushing. Pilots could counteract this by manually trimming the aircraft, but MCAS would reactivate. It would push the nose down again, and again, every few seconds. In testing, Boeing found that if pilots were given time to respond, they could identify and disable the system. But the test scenarios gave them time to read a warning and respond calmly. The Lion Air and Ethiopian Airlines pilots had about 10 minutes. They had never been trained on MCAS. It was not in their flight manuals. Boeing had decided that the system was not significant enough to require simulator training, partly because adding that requirement might have undermined the argument that the 737 MAX was essentially the same aircraft as the 737NG, which would have required airlines to retrain their pilots at significant cost. After the crashes, investigators and journalists pieced together what Boeing employees had been saying internally before either aircraft left the ground. In 2019, Congress released internal Boeing messages recovered during the investigation. One Boeing employee, writing about the 737 MAX simulator in 2016, described the aircraft as designed by clowns, who in turn are supervised by monkeys. Another message discussed whether to disclose a specific feature to regulators, with an employee writing, "I still haven't been forgiven by God for the covering up I did last year." There were messages expressing concern about the safety of MCAS, about pressure to deliver the aircraft on schedule, about a culture in which raising concerns was unwelcome. A 2018 internal message read, "Would I put my family on a MAX simulator-trained aircraft? No." These messages were written before the Lion Air crash. After the Ethiopian Airlines crash in March 2019, aviation authorities around the world grounded the 737 MAX within days. The Federal Aviation Administration in the United States was one of the last to act. It grounded the aircraft on March 13, 2019, 3 days after the Ethiopian crash. The global fleet of 737 MAX aircraft, around 380 planes at the time, was grounded for 20 months. Boeing's CEO, Dennis Muilenburg, was fired in December 2019. Boeing halted production of the 737 MAX. The financial cost was staggering. Boeing took write-down charges of over $20 billion. The stock fell sharply. Deliveries were delayed for years. For years, Boeing avoided criminal prosecution. In January 2021, the U.S. Department of Justice reached a deferred prosecution agreement with Boeing, meaning charges would be filed but dropped if Boeing met certain conditions. Boeing paid $2.5 billion in total, $243.6 million in criminal fines, $1.77 billion in compensation to airlines, and $500 million to a victims fund. The families of the 346 victims were outraged. They argued that the agreement was too lenient, that no individual executives had been charged, and that the deferred prosecution effectively let Boeing off the hook. They were right to be angry. In May 2024, the DOJ concluded that Boeing had violated the terms of its deferred prosecution agreement by failing to implement an effective compliance program. In July 2024, Boeing pleaded guilty to a single criminal charge of conspiracy to defraud the United States. The terms of the plea: a $487.2 million criminal fine, $455 million in compliance and safety investments, and the appointment of an independent compliance monitor. No individual Boeing executive faced criminal charges. The Boeing 737 MAX disaster is not simply a story of a faulty software system. It is a story of a culture that lost its way. Boeing's reputation had been built on engineering excellence. It had produced some of the most advanced commercial aircraft in history. Its safety culture was, for decades, a genuine point of pride. That culture changed over time, particularly after Boeing's 1997 merger with McDonnell Douglas, which brought in a more financially focused leadership style. The priority shifted from building the best aircraft to maximizing shareholder returns. Decisions about safety features, like redundancy in the AOA sensor system, were evaluated on cost. A second display for angle of attack sensor information was available as an optional extra. Most airlines did not purchase it. MCAS was added late in the development process, after the aerodynamic problem became apparent. It was expanded in scope during testing, made more powerful, to be activated in a wider range of conditions, without adequate reconsideration of its safety implications. The FAA, which was supposed to certify the aircraft as safe, had delegated much of its oversight to Boeing itself. Boeing employees who worked on the certification had effectively been reviewing their own company's work. The system designed to prevent disasters had a critical gap. The regulator trusted the regulated. The families of the 346 people who died have continued to fight. They have testified before Congress. They have challenged the adequacy of Boeing's punishment. They have pushed for individual prosecutions. In 2024, one family member described the guilty plea as accountability theater. The fine Boeing paid, he noted, was a fraction of what the company had saved by cutting corners on certification. 346 people, 2 aircraft, 1 software system, 1 company that knowingly did not tell pilots it existed. The cost of that decision is measured in lives. Compliance Edge channel covers corporate failures, safety culture collapses, and the compliance breakdowns behind them, explained clearly for anyone. Subscribe for a new video every week.